Hi, and welcome back to Take It or Leave It Movie Commentaries. Today we're going to be looking at the 1981 film Raiders of the Lost Ark, starring Harrison Ford and directed by Steven Spielberg. Its title was, of course, later changed to Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, Raiders of the Lost Ark is easily one of my favorite films of all time. It's definitely in my top five. And I think it's well regarded by most people as a great action movie, but I don't think it gets the credit it deserves for its characters, its story, its tone, and especially some of the excellent dialogue that we see throughout the film. So sit back, and I hope you enjoy this look at Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay, we're ready to get started. If you'd like to follow along, as I've said before, I'm not sure anyone actually follows exactly along with these commentaries, but I'm watching this on Amazon Prime. I think it's also available on Disney Plus now, but I'm just used to watching things on Amazon now. So if you would like to follow along with me, you can start to watch right now. And here we go, of course, with the Paramount logo. I mentioned in the intro. I think this is a great film. It's obviously terrific as far as action adventure goes, but this first movie in the Indiana Jones franchise, which I guess that's what you call everything nowadays that has more than one movie, is a lot different in just overall tone than Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom or Last Crusade or Crystal Skull. And I don't know about the new film. I'm actually seeing it tomorrow for the first time. I'm bringing my 7-year-old daughter. As a matter of fact, she's never seen anything other than an animated movie in an actual theater. So we're looking forward to that, and I guess it'll be the last time I see an Indiana Jones film, at least one with Harrison Ford in the main role in a movie theater. So it should be a lot of fun. But this film is taken very seriously overall. The character of Indiana Jones is treated differently. I know everyone thinks of Temple of Doom as being very dark and foreboding, and it certainly has moments that are that, but just the way the character of Indiana Jones is handled here in Raiders is something I really like, and I think a lot of that has to do with George Lucas's original vision for the character, which was kind of a melancholy alcoholic that almost had a death wish, which is why he sought out adventure the way he did, and the writing of Lawrence Kasdan. The film was written by Lawrence Kasdan, George Lucas, and Philip Kaufman. It was Kasdan's writing on this that got him the job writing The Empire Strikes Back. Kasdan is excellent with dialogue. There's a few scenes, well, more than a few. There's several scenes in this film they're dialogue based, not adventure based. That I think add a lot to it, and a lot to the character of Indiana Jones and how he sees things. Satipo and Barranca. Barranca's character is never named, but Alfred Molina plays Satipo, of course. This was, I think, his first film, or at least the first time he had any kind of significant role in a film. The actor who plays Barranca, by the way, is the same actor later on that is known as the Monkey Man when they're in Cairo. Not sure why they chose the same actor. Maybe they just liked him a lot, or figured no one would notice, and you don't notice. I've known about that for years and years, but it's not because I picked up on it. I just I remember reading it a long time ago when I was still a kid. And this first shot of Indiana Jones kind of demonstrates what I was talking about. The look on his face is not anything overly dramatic or overly dark. It just shows he's a serious man that does not suffer fools, and that he's dealing with life and death here, and he knows it, and it's part of the way he's chosen to live his life. The main actor other than Harrison Ford that was considered for the Indiana Jones character You hear different things about this, whether he was actually offered the role and it fell apart, or if they were close to offering him the role, or before they realized it wouldn't work. But the main actor was Tom Selleck. You can see his audition on YouTube or his screen test, and I could definitely see why he would have made a good Indiana Jones. He's very heroic, but I don't know. In my opinion, he's almost too heroic. I mean, he's too big and square jawed. Harrison Ford just has that everyman quality that you kind of believe that he could be a college professor at one moment and then someone thrust into these kind of situations. And again, I think Tom Selleck would have worked, but not as well as Indiana Jones. There's the tarantula scene. Alfred Molina has talked about this and said he was definitely terrified, and you can see that in his face. Although from what I've heard, and I'm not a zoologist or animal expert or anything, but that tarantulas don't actually have enough poison to kill a person. I mean, you still wouldn't want one to bite you, but they're not as deadly as they're portrayed in movies. And even this is a great little payoff to Indiana Jones mentioning Forrestal um, early as they're going toward the temple. This was filmed in. I mean, the temple itself obviously is a sound stage, but the outdoor part of the sequence is actually an island in Hawaii. And Indiana Jones's look is based on a character Charlton Heston played, excuse me, in a film called Secret of the Incas in the 50s. And you can see that immediately if you just Google that really quick and see how Charlton Heston is dressed. And Charlton Heston is really kind of more of a similar type to Tom Selleck. I think they kind of overtake a role almost, and it's a little harder for them to get lost in a not lost really. That's probably not the right word, but for them to truly get absorbed into a story, just because they have such screen presence. It's almost an overabundance of screen presence. That's why Steven Spielberg did not want Charlton Heston, excuse me, to play the sheriff, Martin Brody, in Jaws, because he knew, well, then it'll just be Charlton Heston, versus a shark. He wanted someone that was believable as a small town sheriff. And I'm going to try not to overly praise the film as we go through and overly praise Steven Spielberg's work with the camera and stuff, but the entire way he's able to convey exactly what's happening in a character's mind, and for the audience to see and sometimes not see exactly what he wants you to is just amazing. That shot right there with the sand coming out of Indiana Jones's hand with the idol in the background is just amazing. And we know exactly what Indiana Jones is trying to do here, although he never says what he's up to. Um, and we've got the boulder chase coming up, of course, and Harrison Ford liked to do as many of his own stunts as possible, and it's him running from the boulder. I don't know about in all of the shots coming up, but definitely in most of them, and he apparently outran it a couple of times and had to slow down. But he stumbles in one of the sequences, and it's genuine. He actually did stumble and had to get back to his feet quick and keep going. These films, and if you're listening to this commentary, assuming you probably already know at least some of what I'm mentioning, but they're based on the old Republic serials that Lucas and Spielberg both loved as kids. And there's an interesting black and white version of Raiders of the Lost Ark that was done by Steven Soderbergh, that I think works in some ways and sometimes doesn't. There's of course Satipo. Um, by the way, as a kid, I thought his name was Sapito. I don't know where I got that. I don't know if it's one of those things where they retcon the name at some point, but I used to refer to him as Sapito. Um, but his name is apparently Satipo, obviously. And the old Republic serials are really entertaining to watch. If you haven't seen some of them, they're definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of the Indiana Jones movie. You'll see where a lot of this kind of look and feel for these movies come from. So much for Barranca. And here we see Paul Freeman for the first time as Belloc. Kenner Toys did a couple of series of action figures and play sets for this film, just like they did with the Star Wars movies. The Indiana Jones action figure line was not as successful, I think, for obvious reasons. They don't have the incredibly colorful characters and amazing vehicles and all that sort of thing. But they're still really great figures. I've got the entire Kenner collection of Indiana Jones action figures and in vehicles, and the few little they didn't really make play sets as much as they made kind of pieces of environments, and they had more planned. There's a map room that again is not really a play set, and then there's a Streets of Cairo play set that is more just pieces of an environment or a diorama you can put together. There is a Well of Souls playset that's excellent, and I've got that as well. I haven't decided this as I'm recording, but I might put a picture maybe in one of the setups for the Indiana Jones Kenner toys that I have in my display cabinets, along with my Star Wars collection downstairs. Usually, I draw some kind of picture to go along with the commentaries, just because that's something I enjoy doing. But I wanted to get this out pretty quickly with the new Indiana Jones movie coming out, so I'm kind of skipping that. So I'll use something else for the picture you guys get to enjoy as the commentary plays. At least I hope you enjoy it. One of the things that makes this movie as successful as it is with the action sequences, excuse me, and this is a I'll cut myself off here. That's a great setup with the snakes for later. Spielberg has already in this movie showed the audience that setups will be an important part of what happens as we go along. He did that with the Forrestal comment and then showing his body, and then right there with the "I hate snakes, Jock, I hate them." The audience knows, okay, well, there's something that's going to be important somehow. He's already demonstrated that, and sure enough, it obviously comes up with the Well of Souls down the road. That's great writing and great directing combined. I love Indiana Jones's just his desk there. I thought that looks exactly like what his desk should look like. I think it's great, and the fact that he's got all these papers and all this just stuff coming out of his arms, and they leave the room here in a minute. It is perfect. I mean that's exactly how I would picture the character. That was Denholm Elliott we saw as Brody that just came in. He has a small part in this film, but it's important, and again his character is treated much more seriously here than it is in Last Crusade. I'm not sure why they decided for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade to make him into kind of a joke. I there's a pattern in George Lucas and Steven Spielberg's films where when they do get into sequels, the jokes become broader and, in my opinion, more unnecessary. They treat things that were taken seriously and successful when they're first introduced, and they turn them into gag lines, and I'm not a fan of that at all. I mean, you can see that with Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back, and then how he becomes a, basically just an excuse for a silly joke in Return of the Jedi. I'm not a fan of that sort of thing, and unfortunately, that's kind of what happens to Marcus Brody's character. But there's Indiana Jones with his hands just and arms just full of stuff. And this is one of the things I'm already violating what I said. I'm going to try not to praise the 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 work by Steven Spielberg and Kasdan the entire time, but it's hard not to. But these long dialogue scenes are one of the things that Spielberg, not just in this movie, but in most of the films he's done, handles great. I mean, he finds very efficient but very effective ways to handle what could be just purely exposition, which is obviously the point of the scene, but he does it in a way that holds our interest and makes sure we pay attention to things that we're going to need to know. And the guy talking now, the government agent that's a little portly. His real name is God, it escapes me at the moment. William Hootkins, I believe, something like that. But anyway, he for such a non-star, obviously a character actor. He's in a lot of big franchises. He's Porkins in the original Star Wars. He has a role here. Obviously, he's also in Superman 4, which is it's a terrible movie, but it's an interesting movie just because of all the behind the scenes chaos and the way it turned out, and the reasons it turned out the way it did. And he's also Lieutenant Eckhart in the '89 Batman film. So he had a really interesting career. And a lot of the credit for this scene, as I mentioned earlier, goes to Lawrence Kasdan. It's very efficient writing for exposition, which is always awkward in films. This never comes across as simply something that we have to get through for the movie to continue. It's always interesting, and it demonstrates the serious nature of what they're dealing with, and sets up the fact that you're gonna have to go up against the Nazis. When they were mentioning Ravenwood, Abner, who Karen Allen's character's father. I'm not sure if they filmed this or if it was just in the script and didn't film it, but there's a line of dialogue from Marion later that explains that Abner died in an avalanche. She does tell Indiana Jones later that he died, but she doesn't get that specific about it. And as a kid, I remember thinking that there would possibly be something having to do with maybe Abner not being dead in a future film. Obviously, it was not clear back then that the movies were going to be such separate action pieces as they became, at least until the Crystal Skull, when they kind of, brought Marion back and made references to the other films. I didn't know as a kid that they were going to be almost strictly standalone movies like the I love this picture too that they used for the arc that was done by Ralph McQuarrie, who was a real genius when it came to this sort of thing. If you're not familiar for some reason with Ralph McQuarrie's work, just look up the paintings he did for Star Wars and the concept work he did for the Star Wars films. They're incredible. I've got some of them framed and they look amazing. I'm a huge fan of Ralph McQuarrie, but it makes sense that they did become standalone films. And this is something that I think if you're into Indiana Jones enough to probably listen to this commentary, you're probably already aware of this, but the concept for Indiana Jones, who was originally called Indiana Smith, by the way, comes from a vacation that George Lucas took to avoid the pandemonium having to do with the Star Wars premiere. He wanted to get out of town. I think just because of his anxiety about how the movie would be received, and wanting to avoid the media as much as possible, even if it did well. I mean, Lucas is someone that clearly doesn't really enjoy doing a lot of press or doing a lot of talking to the media. So, in any event, he took a vacation to Hawaii with Spielberg, and Spielberg told Lucas that he had always wanted to do a James Bond movie. And George Lucas said, "Well, I've got something along those same lines," and he described the character of Indiana, again at that time Indiana Smith, which was an adventure seeking archaeologist, and that was the beginning of this film. And you can see Marcus right there explaining his concerns about the ark, and in Indiana Jones, of course, much more concerned about the value of the find and amazing it would be to actually find the lost ark than the danger involved. Marcus is very serious there, kind of acting as a voice of reason, and unfortunately, in my opinion, in the Last Crusade, he's understand why that's something that seems to happen in these movies. I love this old look at plane travel. Even with Indiana Jones in his suit. And it just occurred to me, boy, if Tom Selleck had gotten this role, he would have been awfully cramped in that tiny little airplane seat. Tim Matheson also did a screen test for Indiana Jones. I'm not sure if that one's on YouTube or not, but I know I've seen it. But he's almost. I think Matheson he's not heroic enough. I mean, he's almost too much of an everyman. I mean, he's someone that belongs more in I think, in a light comedy than a movie like this. again, that's just my opinion, and maybe that's because those are really the main roles he's had over the years. Maybe he could do something more. And as a kid, I remember watching this drinking scene. I didn't understand that Marion was drinking against another man. I mean, excuse me, I didn't know she was drinking against a man. I thought the man here in the scene was another woman. Um, I don't know why exactly I thought that. I think there was just something, I guess, feminine about his face. And I remember a behind the scenes look at this film where Spielberg intentionally chose the woman there that's watching Marion with those wide eyes, and brought her up to the front because he wanted to make sure he had that look, so the audience wouldn't miss it. But you can see I mean, the guy here, I mean, does kind of look like an overweight woman. I think it's kind of the hair and the thin lips. Just I don't know. I'm not sure when I realized finally that it was actually a man. Aaron Allen again is a great choice for this. I mean, she's obviously attractive, but she's realistic looking for the life she's led and the life she's about to lead as far as getting involved again with Indiana Jones. The use of shadows here, I'm praising it again, but it's always worth noting the use of shadows in this movie. And there's a good example of Indiana Jones's shadow against the wall is another excellent feature. And Karen Allen handles these scenes great. You never doubt that she's a girl that could actually run a bar in Nepal, and that she could deliver a punch to Indiana Jones's jaw. And I like that it's a punch, not a slap. I mean, it's a full on bam. That's a great. It's a very small touch, but it's perfect for her character. She doesn't slap; she punches. And finally, Indiana Jones is in an environment where he would actually need to be wearing what he's wearing. Usually, he's in some incredibly hot location where the last thing in the world you'd want to do is be wearing a leather jacket. But in Nepal, it actually comes in handy. There aren't too many instances of that throughout these films, but the outfit works for the character no matter what. That's what's important. Yeah, see, here's the conversation with Abner, and she never really mentions that he dies in an avalanche, and I'm not sure if that was deleted or it was just a line in the script that didn't make it. And $3,000 back then was a fortune. There she goes again. Just gonna punch him again. This was another kind of environment that Kenner had plans to make was the Ravenwood Bar, uh, which I wish they would have had it. And I was kind of surprised and still am that they didn't decide to use the same, at least basic setup, or base from the Star Wars Cantina set, or the Star Wars Cantina playset, because they had used that once before with the Butch and Sundance line, which were the basis for these figures. They had kind of the quick draw type spring loaded action in one of the figures' arms, and in the Butch and Sundance line, and they had the base for a Western bar that they then used for the Cantina set, and they could have easily done that here for this. I'm surprised they didn't. It would have been a lot cheaper to produce, but as it ended up, they didn't produce it anyway. And now we're introduced to Ronald Lacey as Tote, and he, although they never say his name in the film, um, no one ever refers to him by name, and he's apparently a major. Uh, and in some ways, Tote has kind of become, at least to casual fans, more of the memorable villain from this movie. Spielberg cast Lacey because he reminded him of Peter Lorre, and Tote is more villainous. I mean, he has the villain outfit. He's a Nazi. He's just very menacing and sinister. So I can see why he's remembered more than Belloc. Plus, in the first wave of the Kenner action figures, they produced a Tote figure instead of Belloc, just because he looked, he just looks more interesting. Belloc never does anything as villainous as Tote does in here in his first real scene by threatening to torture Marion with the. It's hard for me to not just get wrapped up in watching most parts of this movie just because I think it's so well made. And this is kind of a rarity in the Indiana Jones films in that it's a for the most part there's some hand to hand combat, but it's mostly a shootout. Later on, there was less and less of Indiana Jones even trying to use his gun. I mean, it became such a character trope that he would use a whip and in his fists that they would leave out, the fact that he also carried a gun. And I think this is a really well done gunfight. It doesn't go on too long. It's believable. They wanted Tote to original, well, not wanted, but the original plan was to have Tote have a mechanical arm that also turned into a machine gun. I think it had some other kind of weird ability with fire, maybe, or something. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but I know I've seen sketches of Tote with one of his arms being mechanical, and they decided against that because it was just kind of too far out. And I agree with that. It would have been interesting, but especially for the time period and stuff. I mean, that I think that would be a little much. And I'm not sure if they offered him the role or if they just wanted to consider him for the role. But they had thought about Klaus Kinski um, to play the part of Toad, and I can definitely see, if you're familiar with Kinski, you probably can too. I can definitely see him in this part. They're probably thankful he turned it down, because Klaus Kinski, from all reports, can be a complete maniac to deal with. If you look up information on Klaus Kinski, you'll find plenty of information about what kind of an actor he was, and what it took to try to work with him. He apparently didn't do Indiana Jones, or didn't consider doing it, because they offered him more money to do a film called Venom, which I actually like a lot. And there are some great stories of Klaus Kinski doing Venom and his battles with Oliver Reed, who was also one of the stars of Venom. Oliver Reed is a or was a notorious alcoholic, and didn't care that he was an alcoholic, and didn't care if you cared if he was an alcoholic, and he and Klaus Kinski did not get along. I'm not sure Oliver Reed got along with many people, but with Klaus Kinski's, I don't know, temper or personality or whatever, I mean, I think it was inevitable that he'd clash with someone like Oliver Reed. But I actually like the movie Venom a lot. It's about a snake and a kidnapping plot that goes horribly wrong. Not just a snake, a black mamba. But anyway, that's for another video. And there's John Rice Davies as Sala. He does a great job in this. He's so jolly and friendly and believable. And I mean, you can tell he has genuine affection for Indiana Jones and develops genuine affection for Marion, but is also very serious about his work. And standing in for Cairo, by the way, in this film is Tunisia. Um, I think the I think Tunisia owes the fact that people even know what and where it is to George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Tunisia, of course, is what's usually used for Tatooine in the Star Wars film. And I'm no expert on the actual Lost Ark. I don't know if the exposition we saw in the government meeting about the history of the Ark and the legends and stories about what happened to it, and this whole exchange with Sala. I don't know how much of this is actually true to the Bible. It'd be interesting to know if you do happen to know how much of this matches up with the Bible stories. Please leave it in the comments. I'd love to know. And speaking of that, if you can think of something you'd like me to review or to discuss in a future video, please let me know. Obviously, I've got my own movie collection that I could talk about for days and days. But if there's something that anyone would like to see specifically, please let me know. And here we go with the same actor, as I mentioned from the beginning sequence of the film. I like that little. And the film never overdoes it on comedy here. I mean, there are definitely a few funny moments, but there's never anything that's strictly played for comedy. And these little quick scenes of pacing around and watching just kind of adds tension to the entire sequence coming up. You know something is about to happen, and there's no talking about it, no dialogue necessary. And I think some other writers and some other directors may have just cut just right to that scene of the Nazi and the swords people just appearing, or maybe just cut right to this when they run in and start attacking without showing the all those scenes of the setup, which would be a mistake. here we go with the whip. That's a I just it's such a small thing, but I love that shot of him just getting the whip out. Like, okay, here we go. Um, like you would in another film of watching someone draw their gun. It's just a close up shot of Indy getting the whip out. And we're getting serious now. In there too, that's a much more interesting way to show that that guy got hit in the head with the with the pan that she's carrying. There's a reason to show her do it. Um, and speaking of the Kenner figures that I mentioned earlier, this is right here kind of the main little pieces they used for the Streets of Cairo playset. There you got several little baskets, and you could put a Marion. She it didn't really count as a figure. It was just a molded piece that was Marion curled up. You could put her in one of the baskets, and there was a monkey with his arm up. This is my favorite moment of the film, and like a lot of things, this was an accident. And if you already know the story behind this, I'm sorry for having to hear it again, but it's worth telling. This so dramatic, all the people parting, and here's this obviously bad dude with a sword, and bam! I love that. That is, yeah. I mean, that is. I I can't tell you how much I love that, and it makes total sense. Why wouldn't you just shoot him? And this is what I meant by if you've heard this story already, which you probably have. I apologize ahead of time, but you can't do a Raiders of the Lost Ark commentary without talking about it. But Harrison Ford and most of the cast and crew, if not all of them, except for Spielberg, who had his own food, I guess, flown in, but they were very sick from, I don't know, dysentery or whatever you call it. Basically, incredibly upset stomachs. And it was originally scripted for Indiana Jones to have what it seems like they're setting up, a whip and sword battle with the swordsman in black there. But because Harrison Ford was so sick, and he just wanted to lay down somewhere and continue to suffer, Harrison Ford or somebody finally said, why don't I just shoot the guy? And they did. Now they also filmed at least part, maybe all, of the battle with the whip and sword. And you can see some of that footage on YouTube. And I think it worked out much better just shooting him. For one thing, like I said, it's my favorite moment in the film, one of my favorite moments in any film. But also because the whip and sword battle, as exciting as it was, the way they had planned it was that as they were fighting back and forth, there was a butcher using his butcher's knife in time with the action in it. From what I've seen of the footage, it looks like it was a little too comical for my taste. So I'm glad for several reasons that it turned out the way it did. Also, I've never seen and never read how Indiana Jones was supposed to kill the swordsman. It's not in the novelization. It's the sequence is not in the comic adaptation. So I don't know how the battle was supposed to end with him and the swordsman. I mean, obviously, I think it's safe to assume the swordsman would have been killed, but I don't know how that would. I don't know how that was supposed to happen. If anybody has any information about that, let me know. But I don't know. I don't know how it was supposed to conclude the way it was originally intended. This dialogue, and see here you get kind of a glimpse too of the Indiana Jones that Lucas originally mapped out, of an alcoholic or at least a hard drinking, Humphrey Bogart type of guy. And Lawrence Kasdan, wrote the dialogue. He's great with dialogue, and this scene is an excellent example. Indiana Jones and Belloc here discussing their philosophies and reasons for going after the Ark. And here we see Spielberg showing you other things in the scene besides just two people talking. This is probably Paul Freeman's best scene in the movie. And the way this is shot from, with Ford in profile and Belloc too wearing a. I mean, I can't imagine wearing a suit, whether you're actually in Cairo or where they were in Tunisia. Let me wear a suit here in the worst environment for a lot of clothing probably on Earth, and a hat to go with it. Ugh. At least Indiana Jones has taken off his leather jacket to wander around the streets of Cairo. That at least makes some sense. This next line is great. Let's go see him together. I've got nothing better to do. That's just odd. And you can see too that Indiana Jones means it. He's ready to die right here. And then Salah's children run in and say, I mean, he didn't care. He's ready to go down. That's a great character moment, and obviously a lot of what Belloc says just further sets the suspense for what's going to happen when they finally do get hold of the Ark and open it. And it's worth noting too that it's a real blow when we think Marion is dead. Certainly as a kid, I thought that was the end of Marion, and just in her few scenes, you'd grown to really like her, and it was upsetting to supposedly see her killed. This scene with the imam or the wise man here, um, has a few pieces of dialogue that were deleted that are important later on. I think the film works fine without them. I think sticking them in might have even made what happens when they open the ark a little too obvious. But but I don't know. I mean, I can see leaving them in and taking them out. But in any case, the imam is the one that apparently tells them not to touch the ark and not to look at the ark, if it's open, not to look at what's inside, which is where it comes from later on when Indiana Jones tells Marion not to look at it, and why he and Sala don't open it immediately, and why they make sure they have the poles and box it up and treat it the way they do. But that was kind of another piece to go along with the Belloc dialogue earlier that sets up what's going to happen when they finally do get hold of the ark. It's also kind of interesting too that the monkey here eats the poison date and dies, but the monkey man himself survives. He gets away unscathed. That doesn't happen with most villains. I mean, he's certainly not a major character by any stretch, but it is unusual. Kenner made a figure of the Monkey Man, by the way. Like I said, they only did a couple of waves of figures. They made Indiana Jones, of course, and They chose to make a Marion figure in her white dress that she puts on for Belloc later, which is an unusual choice. I think they picked that one because of the Well of Souls playset, because that's what she has on when they're in the Well of Souls, obviously. And they made Tote, and then the Cairo Swordsman in black. Those were the first four figures, and along with the Well of Souls playset. And then the second wave, there was Sala just in a white robe. There was Belloc in a white shirt that came with a map. Um, Gosh, who else did they release in the second wave? There was a mail away with Belloc in his robes that he wears when they actually open the Ark. There was Indiana Jones disguised as a German soldier. They also made the Streets of Cairo environment that I mentioned earlier, and they made a truck for the the truck chase sequence coming up. That's that I love. That's another. I mean, the film has a lot of highlights. But that's certainly one of them. And they made a German mechanic, and they made a map room which came with an Indiana Jones figure of him in the robes you see there. This what they're about to do here is kind of the map room, and it had a pole along with a lot of other little accessories and the headpiece to the staff that you could put on, and a little trick where if you looked at a certain part of the little piece that stood for the map room, a certain part would stand out if you looked at it through the headpiece. And they made a Monkey Man figure that came with the Streets of Cairo set, and then a Arabian horse for Indiana Jones to ride on, and that was really the end of the line. It's too bad it didn't go on, but I can understand why. The there are no different kinds of stormtroopers and people with lightsabers and canteen aliens and droids and all that sort of thing that kept the Star Wars line going for so long. This is a lot more down to earth story, and doesn't work great with action figures. Although they tried again with the Crystal Skull, and they produced a few different waves of figures. And it was fairly successful. It didn't last a long time. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that the Crystal Skull, even though it did well at the box office, was not well received by the kind of fans who would also buy some of the action figures, myself included. I think the Crystal Skull is just I think it's a bad movie. There's no way around it. I know it has people that do enjoy it and defend it, but I think I just think it's a bad film. Although I wish I had $100 for every time someone in the movie says ox, ox, ox. I mean, it reminds me of Carol Ann from the Poltergeist movies. I mean, how many times in that movie can they scream out ox? And again, another long stretch of the film without any dialogue. I mean, there's little snippets here and there, but mostly it's someone doing something that has to be conveyed through the writing, and most importantly through the direction. Um, and it's not easy to make something like this interesting. But Spielberg, I mean, he's always up to that kind of challenge. Actually, some of his best work, I think, is in doing things like this. I mean, these kinds of scenes that really push a director to be creative and to hold an audience's attention. Like that shot right there with the sun just slowly creeping across the map is spectacular. And Spielberg got some great on the job training as far as how to do things like that with Jaws. I did a Jaws commentary on my channel and talked about, and this is well known information too, about how difficult it was to make that film because of the problems with the shark and the problems with the ocean and the fact that the shark didn't work for Spielberg to find ways to imply and to show what was happening without showing a shark. I mean, that was some great, on the job training for um, how to really have an audience see and know what they need to see and know for the story. And this shows too. I mean, this set here and all we kind of gotta look at it in a tracking shot earlier with Belloc and Dietrich, who we haven't talked about, who's kind of the, I don't know if he's the number two Nazi, but he's the most memorable Nazi behind Tote, the most important, I guess, in the story. But as they're walking along, this huge setup for the movie of the cars carrying dirt and rocks and diggers and extras and all that. I mean, this would be a massive undertaking as a filmmaker. And I remember seeing this the first time. I was so relieved when he found Marion alive, and and certainly this didn't make any sense when you're a young kid and you're used to seeing Harrison Ford, as always the hero and all this. But this is perfect for his character that he would leave Marion. I mean, he still has to find the Ark, and if he takes her out of there and they try to escape, for one thing, they're probably not going to make it. But also he loses any chance he gets of having the Ark. I'm not sure the Indiana Jones from Temple of Doom or Last Crusade. I don't know that that character makes that choice. But in this movie, Indiana Jones is handled in a much more serious way, and I think it works. In case that hasn't become clear yet, the scope here that he's looking through, I'm sure it has a more technical name, but it was one of the pieces, by the way, that came with the little map room environment that Kenner made. Here we see just more of what it takes to put on a movie like this. All those extras and the equipment and the digging and the tracks. Speaking of the tracks, and if I didn't mention it before, that's Gobbler standing there next to Dietrich. He's another of the German officers, although they never name. He he's the one who's driving the car when it goes off the cliff later in the truck chase. And that's a great moment with Tote in his leather coat for some reason out in the desert, in a full suit and hat. But where they show how the Nazis had a copy of the medallion, and then the fact that the Nazis copy only had markings on one side. It's another payoff, uh, just like the just like the Forrestal reference and the snake reference that we're about to see here once they open up the Well of Souls. The music does a great job filling in here. This is another fairly long stretch where there's not a ton of dialogue. And John Williams, of course, did the music for this. If there's ever anyone on the planet born to do what they do, it must be John Williams. It's hard to remember and count all all the musical scores he's known for. There's Raiders, this movie, of course, Jaws, Star Wars, Superman, Jurassic Park, E.T., just on and on and on and on. One of the movies that Lucas, where Lucas was the composer, was JFK, and that it's overlooked, but the music in that film is excellent. I've and really really helps the story along as far as the tension and the suspense. I've thought about doing a commentary on JFK in the past, as a matter of fact, but it's so complex, and the real story of the JFK assassination is just as complex as the film, but it's also completely different. I think it would just be it would be awfully hard to do a commentary on that movie and have it make any sense unless you were doing it as some kind of classroom presentation with um, aids and stuff like that. But take it from me, much of what you see in JFK is strictly fiction, or it's based on people remembering things later much differently than they than than their initial accounts of what happened, and a lot of supposition, very little about Oswald himself, which is in reading about the JFK assassination since high school. In my opinion about what happened, which I won't get into all that, changed dramatically about 20 years ago. And here we go. Here's the snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? It's just a great payoff. Um, Steven Spielberg probably does that better than any director with those kinds of setups and the payoff later. And even this coming up with Marion and the drinking. We already know Marion can drink Belloc under the table because of what we saw her doing the first time we were introduced to her character. Yeah, boy, out in the desert with no water, sitting under that tent would not be a lot of fun. And here's the dress. I've mentioned the Kenner action figure line here several times, and that's the outfit that the Marion figure is in, and of course it's one of those things where her figure is the most expensive of the carded Kenner figures. Because they made fewer of them, and I guess they chose to put her in the dress, like I said before, because that's what she's wearing in the Well of Souls, and that was really the main playset that went along with the first four figures. Karen Allen pulls this off great. I mean, you never doubt that she could pull off the action scenes and to do all the things that her character is shown to be doing. But but she also looks great in the dress, and can be very attractive and appealing. That's not an easy combo to pull off. She was a great piece of casting. And ironically, I think the fact that they did cast someone who was so perfect for the role and such a great companion for Indiana Jones, it made it more difficult for Lucas and Spielberg to do the James Bond thing where you have for every film. I mean, everyone from here on was compared to Marion, and they never really stacked up well, which is why they brought her back for Crystal Skull. They didn't really even try to have a standard girl because the main female in the story ends up being a villain. And here, of course, not all these snakes are real, but there were plenty that were. In the scene with Harrison Ford and the Cobra done with a piece of glass between them. Again, another great practical effect that these days I'm sure would be done strictly with CGI, and I get it. I mean, it's faster and it's less expensive, but there's just no substitute for practical effects. And if you're listening to this, I'm probably preaching to the choir on that, but that's just the way it is. And in this Well of Souls, um, somewhere there's a drawing along with the rest of the hieroglyphics on the wall of C3PO. This is another great moment, all done with music and just a quick performance. It's not overdone, nothing's over the top, but they did want to pause and show that this is more of just a job for Indiana Jones. I mean, he wanted to pause for a second and just kind of soak in the incredible significance of finding something like this. I mean, this would be kind of like, it must be like the Robert Ballard felt when he found the Titanic. Just almost an overwhelming sense of what you're doing. A lot of the scene was supposedly ad lib between Paul Freeman and Karen Allen with the drinking. As an audience, we know, by the way, obviously, that she is not as drunk as she appears. It seemed like Belloc. It seems like he would be smart enough to know the last thing I want to do is get really drunk out here in the desert. I can't imagine a worse hangover than one you would have in a desert outside of Cairo. But I guess he's got other priorities at the moment. And I think I mentioned Steven Spielberg casting Ronald Lacey because you reminded me of Peter Lorre. All this whole little sequence with Toad is very Peter Lorre-ish. Yeah, that's great, man. He does a great job of being sinister and disgusting at the same time. Like I said, I can see Klaus Kinski in the role, but it'd be hard to top Ronald Lacey, I think. And this here is they lift the ark out. It's a great design, by the way. It lives up to what we're imagining for the arc. Um, uh, this goes back to the imam, and telling Indiana and Sala not to touch the ark. That's why they're being so careful about how they lifted it and sliding the poles. And you don't really need that information for the way they're handling it. I mean, you would handle something like that pretty gently anyway, but knowing that does add a little bit of gravity to the whole thing, and also why they don't just rip the top of it off right now. I mean, there's no other real reason not to just open it right there. Spielberg moment. They're showing them walking along, but making sure you see what's important in the background, even as they first see it before the camera really focuses on it. And as I'm recording this, I haven't really decided what photo I'm going to use to go along with the video. I was originally thinking of the setup I have with the convoy truck from the original Kenner line. I might use a picture instead of the Well of Souls playset, since it's kind of a representative of the movie. I guess I could use both, but I'm thinking of doing individual reviews of some of my action figure Star Wars, but I have the Indiana Jones line from Kenner as well. Which the skull came out. And Karen Allen can do those little comedic bits too without it becoming farcical and too silly with her trying to crawl on him. I mean, because that's exactly what you do. Giggling there is a nice choice. And the shot of Sala coming up too as the tomb kind of seals. That's great. It's a great character moment for Sala, showing that he really cares for both of them. And unlike the tarantulas, the, you get bitten by a cobra or a highly venomous snake, you are in big trouble. It's got enough venom to kill you, and plenty more left over if they need to kill somebody else. You do not want to get bitten by a venomous snake. Kind of the downside to the great way the Well of Souls with the snakes goes over is that they felt forced to try to replicate this in the next two films. They did it with bugs and insects in Temple of Doom, and then they tried it again in the Last Crusade with rats. None of that is as effective, obviously, because you don't have. I mean, for one thing, it's just a repeat of this scene, but I think mainly because you don't have the fear factor that Indiana Jones has made it clear that just about the only thing he's really afraid of, um, Snake. That's great writing right there. Just add another element to the seriousness of the situation and the suspense. I mean, it's not enough just that they need to get out of there and they're going to die if they don't, but also have the fact that the snakes are closing in and the torch is going out, just stacking the obstacles on top of each other. Did seeing this in the theater, this is a really intense scene. These I don't know if it's really fair to call them mummies because they're um, all mummies. They're just a bunch of dead people. This would really be horrible. And in the theater, this was this was very intense as especially as a kid, but I would think for an adult too. There's a alternative version of them getting out of the Well of Souls where an Arab comes and sticks his head in and then sees Indiana Jones coming out of the hole. I think it's a little silly. So I'm actually glad they didn't use that. Just showing them getting out is plenty. There are a couple of great sequences coming up that really I don't know if they've been topped in a movie since the whole fight with the B-wing plane and then the truck chase sequence. These are just amazing. That's the producer, Philip Kaufman. Um, by the way. And that's Pat Roach taking his shirt off. I love that, just showing him coming out and knowing, wow, this guy, I mean, this business. And it kind of makes sense that with that smile on his face, that he would not just alert the other Nazis. He wants to go out there and handle this himself because this is what he enjoys. So there's an unspoken explanation for something that otherwise wouldn't make much sense. So he just wants to fight for the sake of fighting. And there are some comic moments in this fight. I mean, just like right here, but you never doubt that Indiana Jones is in real trouble here. I mean, the comedy doesn't overtake the situation. See another great example of ramping up the obstacles here and the danger. Just you've got the pilot first with the gun, and he's going to shoot something, but now the plane is going to start gasoline, and then we have the fire. This in the cockpit, and you know, there's never just one dangerous situation. If Spielberg and Kasdan can help it, there's always you know obstacles on top of obstacles. See the propeller. That's a nice little nod to the danger of that propeller for what happened to the big guy here. We never learn the the bruiser's name. He's referred to as the German mechanic. Indiana Jones immediate sense or not. Indiana Jones is not really like Star Wars, where they've expanded and expanded and expanded and given names to every single character you see in the background. Here we go. This is great. And I love how Indiana Jones there for a second just got so mad and gave it everything he had, but it still wasn't enough. But here we go. Wow. That's just a great fight sequence. And rescues Marion just in time as everything just goes straight to hell. Always wanted a V-wing vehicle, by the way, that would be the same scale as the Kenner action figures to kind of display that scene there, but no one's ever made one as far as I know. And it'd be so large, it'd be awfully tough to display anywhere except on a big table, which is not all that convenient. Yeah, with the I mean this as far as a as far as a scene involving practical effects and stuntmen, I don't know of a scene in movie history that tops this truck chase coming up. This is beyond impressive. And here again with the staging that went into this, just with that crowd of people and the guy shooting at them to get them back and all that, just a massive amount of effort. This is a great line coming up. Making this up, so I love that, and that it says a lot about the character. There is more exposition in this movie. I don't think there's too much at all, but there's more exposition than there is certainly in Temple of Doom, and even more than you see in the Last Crusade. But once this gets going with the action, boy, I mean it never lets up for it lets up doesn't let up for much. I mean, we went in from that fight scene with the plane that was great right into to all this, which is just incredible. This was the scene, by the way. We're not quite at that point, but I'll go ahead and talk about it. And these are, by the way, some of these shots too. This is when it's amazing how much Harrison Ford and his stuntman look alike because I defy anyone to distinguish which of these shots is Harrison Ford and which is a stuntman just by looking at it in regular speed. It's basically an impossibility. But the scene coming up where Indiana Jones has to navigate his way underneath the truck that that was done and choreographed by Terry Leonard, who had tried the same stunt himself for a movie that was made just before this. It was one of the many times they've tried to make a franchise out of the Lone Ranger character, and they just keep doing it and not making very good movies out of what has a lot of potential, in my opinion. But anyway, The Legend of the Lone Ranger is an interesting movie itself. Just so many problems, so many odd casting choices and odd behavior by the star, who, as far as I know, was never in anything else. Clinton Kingsbury, something like that. I can't remember his exact name off the top of my head, but just a lot of and the conflict they had with Clayton Moore, who played the Lone Ranger for most of the black and white TV series, which most people remembered at the time the Legend of the Lone Ranger movie was coming out. They got in this big squabble with him about whether he was allowed to wear the mask and the Lone Ranger costume, and it just they just made a total mess out of the thing. But Terry Leonard in the film, and there goes Gobbler that I mentioned earlier, right off the cliff. And even that looks great. Those people going off the side of the cliff, they never look like dummies or mannequins or anything. But anyway, I doubt I'd ever do a commentary of the Legend of the Lone Ranger. For one thing, the movie is just so dull; it's hard to get through, and that doesn't make for a very good commentary. But if you want to read about a movie that's pretty interesting, you can look it up. But anyway, back to the main point. Terry Leonard did a similar stunt as far as going underneath a vehicle. He tried it for a stagecoach sequence in that movie, and got his leg tangled in the wheel of the stagecoach and was hurt really badly. And they never got to do the stunt. So this was kind of his second crack at it. Or just perfect music, just amps up the tension even more. It's great. And you can see there that he's been shot and he's genuinely hurt. Nothing is taken lightly in this movie. And that would I remember the audience making noises when I saw this movie in the theater as a kid when that guy was punching him on the gunshot, because you know how much that would hurt. So that's obviously uh, Armstrong, the stuntman, but you can't tell at all. Here the music ramps up even more to go along with the danger ramping up. Stunt, of course, I was talking about. Just love the music there. Dun, dun. This is great too. I mean, even this is a payoff right here. I mean, he really gets to pay this guy back for being so vicious. Here comes the music again. Dun, 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 dun. Indiana Jones. Just an excellent sequence. That last cringe. I mean, that as I've said, demonstrates that the stakes here are real, and he's actually getting hurt. He's not a Superman, in other words. In the Marvel Comics did a comic adaptation of this film, by the way, and it's very bare bones. There are a lot of parts in the movie that aren't on in the comics, which I assume is maybe they didn't have the screenplay completely finished, or maybe they just made a lot of adjustments as they were filming. Excuse me, which Spielberg does do from time to time. But they show in the comic adaptation, Tote is actually in the car that goes off the side of the cliff, and that's how he's killed. Um, that wouldn't be that significant of a not significant is not the right word, but enough die in my opinion. I didn't trust Katango at first. I thought he was going to end up betraying Indiana Jones. So I was wrong. He ends up being just as loyal as Sala. And these goodbyes to Sala, these are not necessary for the story, but they're great character moments, and they could have been deleted. They're clearly not action oriented and don't move the story along, but it shows their affection for Sala and his for them, and Dave did a great job with this. His performance is strictly why I assume they brought him back for the Last Crusade. His character isn't really needed for that movie necessarily, but again, he's kind of there. It was kind of in the same position as Karen Allen. The character went over so well, seeing him again. So, and he's in the new film as well. So, makers casting choices made it more difficult to do the James Bond thing, where all the characters except for Indiana Jones himself would be pretty much interchangeable. That's just not what happened. It's not the years, honey. It's the mileage. That's another great line, and I'm not. I've heard that was ad libbed by Ford. I'm not 100% sure that's true because it definitely seems like the kind of line Lawrence Kasdan would write. But Harrison Ford's ad lib lines, he doesn't do it a lot, but when he does, they're usually spot on. So it's easy to believe that he ad libbed that. Probably my favorite scene in any film ever, is my favorite because of the Harrison Ford ad lib scene, and that's the scene in The Empire Strikes Back when Han is frozen in carbonite. The "I know" line, in case you don't know, was not what was originally intended, but Harrison Ford insisted, to the director Irving Kershner, that Han Solo's last line as he goes into the freezing chamber, which he could be going to his death, should be a strong character line. Originally, when Leia says "I love you," Han was supposed to say back to her something along the lines of "Just remember that, Leia, because I'll be back." But which would have been fine. Now, no one would have complained. But Harrison Ford really wanted it to be a character line, and they tried over and over again with different things. And finally, Kershner just said, "Just say the first thing that comes to your mind." And he said, "I know," and that was what they went with. And that's to Irving Kershner's credit as well, because Lucas was the producer and the writer, and Lucas was paying for that movie with his own money. But Kershner had the confidence and the ability, frankly, to go to Lucas after when he showed him a cut of the scene, to stick to his guns and say we thought this was better than what you wrote, and Lucas, to his credit, went along with it. But that's my favorite scene, in any film. And it's another scene that has very little dialogue. It's mostly just set by the characters and the fact that we already know the characters and the John Williams music, and you don't need to say a lot. Subject, one of my other favorite scenes in a film. One is in this film, and it's another ad libs scene with the shooting the swordsman. But there's a scene in The Godfather Part Two where uh, the mother of the Corleones has died, and in a previous scene, Fredo and Michael have kind of had it out, and Michael knows, of course, that Fredo was the traitor, and Fredo kind of yells at Michael about how he feels about being tossed aside, and Michael tells his kind of main killer, Al Neri, that he doesn't want anything to happen to Fredo while his mother's alive. And then, of course, the next time we see him, his mother is in the casket. So your first thoughts go to Fredo, and oh no, and sure enough, there's Fredo at the casket. And then a little later on in the scene, Connie, Michael and Fredo's sister, goes to Michael and begs him to forgive Fredo. And Michael, who's been waiting for Fredo to leave before he comes in for the for the viewing or the service or whatever they're waiting on, enters the house, and there's no dialogue at all. It's just Michael walking across the room to Fredo, who's smoking a cigarette and looking down at the floor, totally dejected and lost. And Michael goes up to him, and Fredo looks up at him, and they embrace. And there's this, the music swells, and you think, oh well, Michael has forgiven him, and everything between them is going to be okay, or as okay as it can be in a mafia family. But then Michael looks up with this incredibly cold stare and these Al Pacino eyes, and he just looks at Al Neri standing over in the corner, silently gives him the word to go ahead and put things in motion to kill Fredo. And even Al Neri kind of has a sad look on his face. It's a great scene, and zero dialogue. And as Indiana Jones climbs onto the Nazi sub, there's a little bit kind of left out of this. It's not explained in the final film just how exactly, with the sub submerging here as we see it doing, he manages to stay on the thing. But he, and this is in the comics adaptation, and you can see some outtakes of these scenes being filmed where he uses his whip to kind of tie himself or lash himself to the scope, um, and that's how he's able to stay on the submarine. Now that would depend, of course, on the submarine never going low enough where the entire sub, including the scope, would go underwater, which is not very realistic. Maybe that's one reason they decided just to leave that out, or maybe they just decided, you know what, you don't need to know how they get to the island here, and they're correct, you don't. I think it works fine without showing exactly how it's done. I mean, by now, I think we've all grown accustomed to Indiana Jones simply just doing whatever it takes. Deluxe suit and tie and shirt and everything's has managed to stay awfully crisp and clean during his travels. This is great. The fact that the uniform doesn't fit Indiana Jones, that's a obviously a comment on all the times we see this in movies where someone decides to trade places with one of the villains and they put on their uniform to do it, and of course the uniform just magically fits perfectly. It's a great touch. That's an interesting line. Dietrich just told Belloc he was uncomfortable with the idea of the Jewish ritual that they're about to use for opening the ark, and it's the only time in the film that the Nazis' cruelty toward the Jews is directly referenced, and I think they put that line in there specifically for that because they wanted to make mention of it. Boy, that's a heck of a risk for Indiana Jones to elbow Belloc right there. He could have, could have destroyed the whole, his whole mission right there. But it needed to be referenced in some way. There's so much kind of going on here that's not mentioned with the religious context of the ark and the Jewish people's involvement in that, and then the Nazis' feelings and actions toward the Jews. Needed to make some reference to that. For one thing, just to make it historically accurate. There's Toad probably finally wondering why in the world he decided to wear a letter. The Indiana Jones dressed up in the German uniform, by the way, was one of the figures Kenner made in the second wave, which I thought was an odd choice. He only wears the uniform for overall just a few seconds. Most of it is standing here with the bazooka, and it came with the bazooka, by the way. Um, and you couldn't really use that figure in most of, I think, what kids would do as far as playing with their figures. For one thing, they never made just a generic German soldier for to go along with Indiana Jones in the German uniform. I mean, he can't blend in with another figure because with other figures because they didn't make them. But I think they just kind of wanted an Indiana Jones for the second wave because they knew the hero figure would always sell better than the others. It seems like they could have simply made an Indiana Jones in basically the same figure from the first wave, but just without the leather jacket, as he appears when he's walking around the streets of Cairo. But Kenner may have thought, well, parents aren't going to want to buy that for their kids because it's almost identical to the first one. Um, I don't know if that was their thinking or not, but probably so. And you can see no one's there's no indication anyway. Paul Freeman does a great job there. Freeman's, I think, two best scenes in the film are when him and Marion are drinking in the tent, and that little speech there, I guess, is probably his best moment. Um, it shows that he really does understand Indiana Jones. Well, I'm forgetting the scene in the bar actually in Cairo. I take it back. I think that's probably his strongest scene, but that scene right there we just saw is kind of a comment on the scene of them in the bar where there are two sides of the same coin. But what I was about to say is there's no indication at this point that anyone has actually touched the ark. As you can see, they're still carrying it on the poles. Certainly, there's to believe no one has opened it until this moment coming up. And as we already discussed, we you got Indiana Jones gets the or remembers not to look at the ark, and tells Marion that because of what the imam told them. Although he tells her kind of late, um, that information right there would have been helpful, uh, unless Indiana Jones knew there wouldn't be anything coming out of it. But this little bit of anticipation when there's nothing in it, and then suddenly things start happening is another great moment. But also too, I mean, I don't know what they expected to be inside the Ark after all this time. I thought Hitler really wanted the Ark mainly because it's an artifact, but also we're led to believe he wants it for the power that is kind of given off by the Ark itself, which doesn't have anything to do with what is or isn't inside it. Things are about to get really bad here for everybody. It's a great shot. That looks so haunting. Like the arc really is a portal to somewhere else. It's almost like the Phantom Zone from Superman is in there. This scene, as originally cut, by the way, ended up getting the film an R rating, which there was no PG-13 back then, so they definitely did not want this film rated R. And what I'm talking about is the scenes of their faces melting and Belloc specifically, his face exploding. So they added the fire later to kind of cover up some of the intensity and the graphic nature of Belloc's face exploding, and they got it down to a PG. That's a great shot when that beautiful looking ghost turns into that horrid that horrid demon looking thing. They they pulled off the flying images and the flying ghosts or demons or whatever you want to say with by filming mannequins underwater with a fuzzy lens, and the melting faces, so you can see the fire that kind of covers up a little bit of the in the Belloc's face. But the exploding heads were done with a vacuum machine and a heat gun, and the hot gun to blow up Belloc's head. Just as graphic as it blowing up from the arm. And that this is not an original thought here, but this is it's one of those odd things about the film, that I don't think takes away from the enjoyment of it at all. But Indiana Jones actually doesn't factor into the way things turned out. I mean, whether he had gone after the ark or not, all of that would have happened anyway. So he doesn't really affect the outcome. Of course, they probably never would have found the ark on that isolated island if Indiana Jones hadn't been there. But they don't end up doing anything with the ark anyway, except putting it in that massive warehouse. So he doesn't actually have anything to do with how things turn out. I guess he'd never know what happened to Belloc. Be kind of like Forrestal. Just Indiana Jones probably would have expected to run into Belloc's corpse on some dig or something somewhere. This is great. Just that little line, because the guy says it so effectively, top men, and again has the Spielberg payoff when we see what they're really doing with it. That also makes that line memorable. But it's mainly the way the guy says it, top men. That alone has become a famous line that's used in, in all kinds of different ways as a reference to this. That's San Francisco City Hall, by the way. Love seeing Indiana Jones right there in the era correct suit and the hat and all that. That's great. Just to see him back in, kind of his regular life. And this is a perfect ending to a perfect movie. Storing the arc away, and the music once again absolutely sets the tone. That's a matte painting, by the way. But just storing it away with God knows what else the government has to put in that warehouse. Just, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. A perfect end to a perfect movie. Um, I can't really think of anything else to say about it except what I just said. I hope you've enjoyed the commentary. As always, if there's anything else you'd like to see me do, or if you'd like to see me maybe do some action figure reviews, even some television shows, which I think I might do a few of those coming up. Let me know in the comments. Feel free to subscribe if you like sitting somewhere and listening to me talk and talk and talk, because that's pretty much what this channel is all about. But thanks for tuning in. I enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. I'll see you next time.